Hello there. My name is Jason Luttrell, and I would really love to give a big shout out and thank you to the Global Bar Week, and thank you so much for having me. Specifically, the BCB team for organizing this event, and a special thanks to Angus Winchester for the invitation. This is a big honor for me, and I very much appreciate it. So, hello world, welcome to Global Bar Week. So this talk is about, I'll give you a little bit about myself. So for years, I was a bartender at dives, music venues, nightclubs, and eventually I stumbled my way into a couple of world-class cocktail bars, including Dram and Death and Company, among others. Most of the bars I worked at were pretty divey. So eventually I started my own business, and I noticed that there were some parallels between building cocktail rounds and organizing my consultancy, and subsequently how I organized my life. And so that's what I wanted to talk about. So my decade behind the bar was some of the most important years of my life as far as developing the philosophy that we're going to discuss today. No, I try not to get too heady about this stuff, but it really has impacted the way I operate on a day-to-day basis. So as much as I would love to take credit for this original thought, this is nothing more than a connection of wisdom from mentors and heroes that I've worked with over the years, including Alex Day, the writings of Jim Meehan, and the legend Mr. Sasha Petrasky. So I'm not trying to say that I'm not trying to call out these people like I'm a star fucker or something like that. But it's these people really helped me a lot. So these guys were just students of efficiency, and they were instrumental in helping me understand and applying these principles to my life, and definitely to my business as well. So I want to set the stage for you. So imagine you're getting ready for a dinner rush, and you have to squeeze, and you get a daiquiri and a war date. Can you imagine making that fresh grenadine for yourself, or can you imagine squeezing the lime juice? You wouldn't, because everybody would be tapping their fingers saying, "Where is my drink?" And this would be a complete disaster, right? It would be a massive, massive fail. So today we're going to talk about the powerful connection between organizing your bar and your life through the metaphor of building cocktail rounds. A lot of this stuff is based on an article I wrote for my own website in March of 2019. But since then, it's kind of evolved a lot, and I've meased the hell out of my business. So how do we ruthlessly organize our lives in a way that we can protect our mise en place, like just the day-to-day stuff? So what would be the point of that? In my opinion, the art of building rounds is the highest level of mastery that a bartender can achieve. It connects all the different disciplines that you look for in a great bartender. It's a mastery of your ingredients, knowing where everything is, knowing what's in everything. It's a mastery of how to put those together, and mastery of the cocktails that you're producing with them. More so for me, it's a mastery of your space. And it's and I believe that this is the most understated way to express a mastery of hospitality is by, guests don't want the labor pain, they just want the baby. So when you have all these elements effortlessly under control, you're able to create a relaxing and entertaining environment for your guests. There's no stress. You're in this kind of mental flow state, and there's no anxiety about all the tickets coming in. There's just flow, and this is what truly stands out for me to when the world's great bars. So as we all understand, there's a logic to a cocktail. So each ingredient has a symbiotic relationship with the other ingredients. In the case of most shaken cocktails, we have sugars, acids, and bases, and they all work together to create a balance. Now, building rounds honors that balance and composure, and seeks to execute that and several other drinks like it very quickly, mindfully, and with a sort of effortless intensity. So mise en place is the beating heart of building rounds. Everything has to be everything has a place, and everything has to be in its place. The more complex your cocktail menu is, the more complex your space is going to be, and there's going to be a lot of moving parts. There's going to be things that you run out of, and so it's imperative to keep this space neat, tidy, and organized, topped up, and absolutely ready for anything. There is no taking a break when you're in service, because if you're not preparing for right now, then you're preparing for tomorrow. So nothing can destroy a flow like endless, like picking up empty, sticky, or misplaced, mislabeled bottles. It's just, I remember being very, very frustrated by that sometimes. The conscientious placement of your tools is the difference between a good round and a complete breakdown of your workflow. Grouping your tools and ingredients together in a way that creates a linear movement, and also in a logical order for, say, what if they appeared together in a menu item, creating a linear movement and ergonomic efficiency is the path to not only making drinks faster, but it will also lengthen your career. Now think about it. If you're using your right hand and crossing over, that creates a rigid and inefficient movement, and it leads to strains, aches, pains, and tension. Also on another note, I'm not exactly a spiritual person, but I do believe that a drink made with happy hands and a happy heart makes a drink taste better. I remember this seminar that Dushan Zarek, Aisha Sharp, and of course the master Gary Regan used to give about the mindfulness of bartending. I absolutely believe that happy rice, angry rice, that whole thing. Remember that? So positivity is contagious, and it can absolutely affect the tone of a room. Okay, so we're going to start getting into some very specific parts about building rounds, and specifically now we're going to talk about what I call protecting your Mies, making sure that no outside influence can impact it. So periodically through the shift, you try to be mindful about what you have available to you at all times, and whatever can't fit in the well or surrounding service area should be backed up and handy. Regardless of what's on the menu. It's about what people order, not what's on the menu. So this goes for all spirits, juices, mixers, garnish, service items, napkins, straws, whatever. Everything needs to be stocked up and ready, very handily available. So this isn't your barback's job. This is your job. If you have a barback, teach them your job, and then teach them how to anticipate. They will make epic bartenders when it is their time. So the great barbacks know the cocktails as well as the bartenders do. Now let's talk about pivoting. Now I'm not talking about COVID pivoting. I'm talking about actually pivoting in the cockpit of your workstation. So you want to set up your well like it's a cockpit of an airplane, and you're about to go fly. So everything you'll notice is in a very small space. It's right around there. So everything you need should be within one step of your primary spot, and one of your feet should be able to grow roots in that spot. And then that 1 foot doesn't move, and then everything else around you just kind of pivot from one spot. So if it hits the fan, a single commonly used bottle will be there with just a single pivot of the foot. Now let's talk about tool efficiency. Now, using tools more than once is a great way to trim seconds off your build time, but it isn't like monkey knife fighting. There are rules. Now, keep in mind, these rules don't supersede the cheap stuff first rule. That means you always pour the smallest amount or the cheapest stuff first. So when it becomes impossible to follow these rules, discard the tool and just use a new one. You should have plenty of backup tools. The idea is to constantly maintain a state of readiness. And by discard, I mean set aside to be washed when the round is fully executed. So you set it, throw it in the water, be done with it. So here we go. So sugars, it is absolutely fine to use the same tool, whether it's a teaspoon or a jigger, low intensity to high. Pour the thin stuff like the 1-to-1 simple syrup first. These ingredients always tend to be the cheapest as well, so that follows the cheap stuff first rule. Now, as you get into denser syrups like maple syrup, honey, agave, more fluid will actually stick to the walls of the tool, and the measurement will be impacted, over time. Thus it will be slightly less accurate. So not a lot of people would actually notice that, but you would. And neutral flavors, when we're talking about spirits, neutral flavors go first, and you start with unflavored syrups and then move on to more aggressive flavors like cinnamon or maraschino or kumel or whatever it is. And then that weird pineapple gastrique that you've been working on. Now that brings us into acids. Now acids are typically fresh pressed juice, and I would consider like vinegars, shrubs, and citrates to be a whole different thing. So they probably get their own jigger, but you want to pour these last so the other jigger can just to be safe with the other jigger. So low volume to high volume. If it's going to be 1/4 of an ounce in one drink, get it out of the way. This usually works itself out as there's rarely more than 2 fresh acids in a drink. So some people make a wort, if you're talking about the wort 8, some people make a wort 8 with both lemon and lime juice. That's the same jigger drink. Hard acids like lemon, lime, grapefruit, they can share a jigger without being washed in between, in my opinion. The residual liquid from the last pour is negligible and is imperceptible, has an imperceptible impact on the flavor of the cocktail. Lemon and lime being the most prevalent acids, maybe ask yourself before putting the bottle back. If you have a larger round, then chances are you're going to need lemon and lime again. Before you put it back, say, can I use this lime again? Because that otherwise you have to pick up the bottle twice, and that's very inefficient. When I'm talking about spirit base, typically anything 80 proof or higher is what I mean by spirit base, or the predominant ingredient base of the cocktail, if there is one. So like the Orange Julius cocktail has curacao as a base, for instance. Neutral flavors always come first. That means your vodkas. Anything can go after vodka. By its nature and by an antiquated American definition, it's flavorless and odorless. In fact, measuring vodka will likely leave your measuring tool cleaner than it was before. Now, I rarely cleaned our tools after they'd handle vodka because they were probably cleaner than the water we would use to wash it. So if the components are the same drink, there's no need to rinse the jigger, in my opinion. There's really very little covalent bonding that with that much alcohol, with that high proof of alcohol. Liqueurs are obviously different, but with most of it will leave the jigger when you pour it out, unlike a denser syrup, for instance. So it's not necessary to switch tools between like category spirits within reason. We'll go into that right now. So switching from one bourbon or rye to another bourbon or rye is probably not necessary to change your tool. I wouldn't know the difference. Not that I have this magical palate or anything, but switching between a blended Scotch to an Islay Scotch would probably leave a discernible measure. So you wouldn't use that same jigger for 2 different drinks in that instance. Good spirits deserve respect, and always assume your guest has a palate that can discern the difference. So, in this case, a maybe is typically a no. Don't take the risk because you could ruin one or both of the drinks. So when you're switching from spirit categories like from gin to tequila or rum to a similar style of rum, then it's okay to use the same tool for the same drink. It's always, if you have one drink and you're just making one drink, then one tool can go one tool can be used for the entire drink, obviously. Let's talk about the ballet. So if your mise is really tight, you shouldn't be crossing over to other bartenders, and I'm making a few assumptions here. So every bar is unique, and it has its own benefits and drawbacks. Like in New York, for instance, most of the infrastructures are built hundreds of years ago, so a lot of times you kind of get what you get as far as plumbing and drainage and stuff like that. So we have to build the bars around the existing infrastructure in most cases. Also, it's important to note in the States we have the Americans with Disabilities Act, which means that most new constructions have to be accessible by wheelchair. If you're in Europe, I'm not sure how that works as far as grandfathering in new architecture, but for us it's kind of interesting because sometimes you can see a bar that you can land a jumbo jet behind. So once I built a bar that had a mise with a bar that had a length that accommodated 6 bar seats, but had to serve 120 people on the floor. Now, with 2 bartenders, we were climbing all over each other all night. And that was a bar called Jaybird. That was my first consulting project. It later became Seamstress. So this will be obvious to most of you, but when working in a really tight space, it's extremely important that you never violate the other space without announcing your presence. Now, by announcing, it doesn't have to be like, "Hey, I'm here." But it absolutely can be a safety issue because if there's water on the floor, glass in your hand. For me, this usually comes in the form of a verbal behind you. But at one place, we developed a system of kind of gently tapping each other, and that was very effective for us because we weren't burdening the guest with our internal communication. Now, the idea is that we made it as effortless as possible for them to enjoy their drinks without hearing us, without hearing our chatter. They didn't want the without hearing our chatter. They didn't want the labor pain. They just wanted the baby. So, this is when we're talking about efficiently building rounds, it's very, very important to have good communication with your co-bartender. So there's a reinforced physical dialogue that helps us sync up with eye contact and peripheral vision. And also, it was also very good team building, and it made the post-shift beers taste a lot better. So we really felt like we were a unit, and this was a very, very efficient way to work. So when I worked at Death & Company, we had some 75 or 80 smaller cheater bottles. So rather than having a full 750 ml on the bar, we had cheater bottles that were shared between the bartenders. Knowing those guys, there's probably hundreds now. They love their cheater bottles. I'm pretty sure they designed the menus just to watch me knock over these little tiny bottles. So when I was working there, it was 95% menu cocktails, and the classics were being served. And we're talking about 50, 60 cocktails on a menu that rotated 3 or 4 times a year. So, the other 5% was like gin and tonics and beer and wine. So the service to service this menu, the bar was split into 2, and the point bartender would service all the guests at the bar, 12 seats, including handling cash, and the service bartender would serve the servers and roughly 40, 50 guests. The point well was designed around executing the items used most, like as in the menu. And then not necessarily around what we thought the standard bar order would be in most bars. The efficiency was in having our tools ready for us in context. So the service bartender has a much larger well because the likelihood of the 40 to 50 guests at tables to order some sort of a classic or previous menu item was relatively high. That is in addition to any classic cocktail that you can think of. So the point was our wells were not the same. So when the point bartender needed something, we had to communicate to avoid crossing over. Now this was the most efficient path. When we were done with it, it was immediately placed in a commonly agreed place and returned to its labeled and its right spot immediately, because in the next 5 seconds, I could possibly need it. So protecting your mies is like vitally important, because if you can't find a tool, then it just interrupts your flow. So if you're not relying on anecdotal evidence to set up your mies efficiently, look at your sales, look at your POS, and find out what your product mix is. If your product mix has a certain spirits ranking higher than other things, like say vodka sodas, then make sure that those bottles are both displayed on the back bar and in the well where both bartenders can reach it without turning their back to guests. Now, I'll just assume that all bars have only 2 wells and 2 bartenders. That's like every bar, right? Every single bar in the world is that, right? Okay. So if you're constantly going to the back bar to grab that same bottle of premium scotch, then it should be living in your well. Even if the label gets banged up in the well, that's fine, because you got the pretty one in the back bar. You can still keep it up there and make sure that the guests are aware of it and put it on your scotch list, but can be a banged up bottle in your well because it's going to sell. And this is about efficiency, and efficiency leads to speed, and speed leads to more money. More money is a byproduct of happier guests. So, all right, let's move on to ice. Now, ice is, we've had our ice obsession for years now. So regardless of your jigger or pour, if you pour out of the bottle, or if you store and pours, or from a gasoline pump, the same rules apply. Always start with the cheap stuff, and ice always comes last. I've never really understood why people have a hard time with this unless you're timing it out. But ice should come last because it's like an ingredient that deteriorates. So ice always comes last when building individual drinks, and this should only be done when the drinks are in the round are completely built. So all of the liquid is mixed together in the tin or the mixing glass, and then you add the ice, because that's when the clock is ticking. It's like baking. Once it's in the oven, it starts to cook, right? So once you add the ice, it starts to chill. It starts to dilute your drink. And so this can be timed. This can be put together conscientiously. So in order to have more control over temperature and dilution, save the ice for last unless you're specifically timing for that round. And that's very rare occasions. But generally speaking, going from big ice to little ice will help you control the different rates of dilution for the different kinds of ice. And I'm talking about big blocks. Like if you're shaking with big blocks, or if you only use those for prestige, so where you're actually delivering the drinks, or if you're shaking with Hoshizaki or cold draft cubes, that is going to be a different kind of shake in a different amount of time. Maybe you're shaking with shell ice, or shit ice as we call it in the States. Maybe you're shaking with pellet ice. there's different drinks have different preparations and they lead to different textures. So you want to be mindful of all this. So when you're preparing drinks, it's vitally important to not begin the dilution portion until the round is synced up, until you're ready to fire everything in sequence. So up until the ice point, you can verify that you got all the ingredients measured correctly and make sure that any adjustments necessary before the clock starts, that you've made any adjustments necessary before the clock starts ticking. It's worth it to take a moment to get this straight in your head. This is a very good time to taste while your drinks are in the tins and they're not delivered in the cocktail glass. I really hate seeing people taste drinks when they're actually just about to go out to the guests. That looks very gross. So when finishing or presenting your drinks, here's an order that I think might help get them out as fresh as possible. And hopefully we'll have a transcript so you guys don't have to write all this stuff down. But a benchmark for me is having really dry ice, as in the ice hasn't melted yet, and you can see the dryness of it. Like literally the ice has a matte finish and hasn't started sweating yet. That's what I would consider like a really fresh presentation. So now the presentation order. So I would serve drinks first in this order, like large cubes first, then Collins Spears, then cold draft and Hoshizaki cubes, then drinks that are served up, and then drinks that are served on pellet ice, and then shaved ice. Now, so we talk like the ice and the ingredients. Now let's talk about technique. So let's talk about shaking. Shake is an often underestimated element of technique, but every shake is completely unique. So by far the most violent of all our emotions, but it can also be graceful and meaningful. So shaking, as we know, is a way to influence the temperature and texture and dilution. Now, temperature, texture, and dilution. We have one job: putting the drinks together in a way and delivering them with great temperature, texture, and dilution. So these three elements are the vital components of preparing any drink, whether they're cold, room temperature, fizzy, neat, served up or on the rocks, or strained into your cupped hands. It doesn't matter. Shaken drinks are typically served last to retain as much life as possible. Now, life is what we understand to be like that kind of effervescent interaction of air, liquid, and ice and force commingling and forming and reforming to create this kind of bubbly feature. So it's like effervescence. It tickles your nose if you get it right. So you want to make sure that your guest has that experience. So it makes a cocktail more three-dimensional, and it's the difference between a good drink and a great drink, in my opinion. But it is very fleeting. So you want to make sure that is experienced by the guest, not by the server delivering the drink. So I'm going to make a few assumptions here when we're talking about ice and shaking and all this stuff. Is that we have frozen glassware. We have fresh ice that's not sweaty, and then we're talking about a shaker full of ice. And I'm going to talk about relative shake times here because there are just so many variables when shaking. That includes like ice quality, ice size, ice density, ambient temperature. There's a million different factors. So at a certain point, you just kind of get to know your room and you can anticipate how long to shake. So I'm not going to tell you shake for, it actually drives me crazy when I see recipes that say shake for, stir for this many rotations or shake for this many seconds. It's all relative. In the interest of rules and all the cocktails having already been built, room temperature cocktails should go out first. That's because you have all the time in the world. Then you should go for the shaken or strained, the shaken, strained, and up or neat cocktails. So like your daiquiris. The shorter than that should be two different cocktails that have two different tins, shaken or strained on a large block. And then shorter than that is shaken or topped with champagne. So you can always come back and do the champagne. Shorter than that is drinks served on cold draft or similar dense ice cubes like a gin and tonic vodka soda. Or Collins. Shorter than that should be something that's served with a dense ice cube and topped with an effervescent, like a Collins. And then shorter than that should be anything served on pebble ice because the pebble ice has much more surface area. Now, these whip shakes are meant to, when you're shaking with pebble ice, it's just meant to kind of dilute it slightly because the ice delivering to the table is going to do all the work, and so that's why we call it kind of a whip shake. Now, the second technique that I want to talk about is straining. Now, straining a cocktail is just as important as any of the other steps in making a cocktail, if not more. A very wise person once told me that there are two things that you do slowly and deliberately: measuring and straining. And he also said, "Slow is smooth, and smooth is fast." And you know, that's an old military term that they use in sniper school, I think. So the reason you want to strain a shake and drink slowly is to allow the Hawthorne strainer to do its job and capture as much ice as possible, because it broke apart when you shook it. Now, personally, I like to use a fine mesh strainer whenever I shake with any ice other than block ice, because my particular style and the texture that I was going for required a very, very hard shake. I was a very hard shaker. And so I would just turn the ice into dust. But what I wanted to see was the ice dust left at the top, like in the tins, like a fine strainer catches all the solids. A Hawthorne strainer can't. Now so let's move on to stirring now. Stirring is basically the bookends of your rounds. By bookends, I mean like the beginning and end of your rounds. So where you start and where you finish, the timing is absolutely crucial. If you don't stir long enough, there's not enough water. If you stir too long, the drink is too wet, too diluted. So this is all compounded by whether or not the drink is served on the ice or whether it's served up. And so you kind of just have to do this mental calculus all the time, making sure that you're getting the drinks right. So these factors, along with environmental considerations like did the air conditioner crap out, or are you doing an event in the Sahara Desert? These all factor in. So I just want to do a quick note on double shaking. So the only reason you would double shake is if you have definitely mastered the single shake with both hands. You don't want to be stronger in one hand than the other. So oftentimes people have a different shake when they double shake, and that's a problem because the same drink isn't going to come out from right hand to left hand. So you have to decide, like, is this good? Is this a good representation of my skill? So how does this technique represent your attention to detail in your finish or your prestige, as the magicians would call it? I would only do this if you've mastered the shake in your less dominant hand by itself, and then incorporate the other hand eventually. Like anything involving your weaker side, this will feel awkward in the beginning, like as in using your right hand and left hand to pick up bottles. But when your strength is up, this ability will pay dividends as far as efficiency is concerned. Now, not all drinks are meant to be shaken for the same length of time, in my opinion. And that depends on your recipe, your glassware, and a whole bunch of other factors. But what you want to go for is you want to make sure you get the same wash line every single time. So sometimes you're only shaking with a single piece of ice to chill, but not necessarily to dilute, as it usually is the case with cocktails served on crushed, cracked, or pebble ice. Now, you also want to keep in mind that with the large surface area of these kinds of ice, I'm talking about pebble ice, the surface area is much larger, and the dilution will happen in the drink's journey to the guest table. And there's a lot of other factors in that too, especially like when you're dealing with frozen glassware. And this is mitigated by other factors such as the temperature of the glass, the wetness of the ice, the distance, the travel to the guest. Like if you have to walk a mile, then the drink is going to be wetter than when it started, obviously. So this is another reason why ice is typically one of the very last elements in finishing a round, at least as far as I'm concerned. Now, there is one notable exception to this that I can think of right now, and that is the julep. With the julep, you want to make sure that it's prepared ice cold, and then put it into the fridge. Like what we used to do is put it in the fridge or the freezer. We used to build it first, ice it, and then put it into the fridge or freezer so it would develop a nice frost on it. Another fun exception about this cocktail is it's one of the only ones you can actually grab it by the glass, or we used to call this the Jersey claw, where you grab a glass and it's gross, but it still happens. All right, so let's talk about double straining for a second as well. So this technique goes hand in hand with this technique goes hand in hand with shaking, of course. But what I do is shake both cocktails, assuming there's only one cocktail in each shaker, until they're individually close to done. Not completely done, but close to done. What I would do is I would set them both down and get them off the ice as fast as possible and into the appropriate glass. Or I'm sorry, what I would do is I would finish the cocktails almost and then put them on the ice, set them aside. And then when I was almost done, by the time it was time to finish the entire round, I would give them a quick rattle and then strain them into the glasses. And that way it kept them fresh. But I was still kind of mentally timing the dilution. So when a drink is sitting in a tin after it's shaking, it's losing life rapidly. It's losing a lot of life second to second. So the best way to combat this is when shaking several different drinks is to keep your tins sealed and give them a quick rattle. When shaking several different drinks is to keep your tins sealed and give them a quick rattle, like to breathe new life just before you're straining them. But you obviously want to be mindful of the initial shake because you don't want to have overshaken them and then giving them a rattle. So a note about me, just a side note about me is here, when we have multiple tins and mixing glasses available, when you're done with the tin, discard it in the sink or get it out of the way because you can always clean it later, but you shouldn't worry about that in the middle of a round. The only focus should be on getting this round out perfectly, and don't be distracted by dirty tools. There will be time for that after the round is over. Towards the end of my time behind bars, I saw a lot of double straining, double stirring, quadruple stirring. Now this this is definitely a practice that you should master and do that before service maybe. I remember trying this in service. I remember looking at the ticket and saying, yes, I can do 4 Negronis at the same time or whatever, like a Manhattan, a Negroni, and a Martini at the same time. And then I failed. I failed so bad. So just make sure you got this right because you don't want to distract people by messing up like that. At the end of the day, the proof is always going to be in the wash line. But, in the case of like a Negroni, Martini, Manhattan, these all have different stir times. So make sure that you are mindful that your mind is on these 3 different elements. And again, slow is smooth, smooth is fast. Let the ice do the work. Okay, so this is the mother of this presentation is the build order. So as the orders start to come in, it's time to start thinking about what we call stacking orders. This technique was essential to efficiency when a large volume of orders started coming in all at once. You had to be mindful of multiple tickets. You didn't work on one ticket at a time. You worked on multiple tickets at a time. The name of the game is getting tickets out fast and perfectly and making sure that everything is perfect. So drinks that are made well taste good. Drinks that come out good and fast taste great. People were not particularly patient in New York. So the actual order that the tickets arrive is not nearly as important as the efficiency that you use to execute, but only if there are efficiencies to be had. So you don't want to force it. If you see the same drink on 2 tickets, build them both in the same tin. This is okay because especially if they're on the ice. So this should not be at the expense of the larger ticket, however. So for instance, if you see a 4-top that ordered a Manhattan, a margarita, a beer, a vodka soda, and you see another ticket for a single margarita, then by all means, double up that margarita and serve them both and get 2 tickets out at the same time. You can add ice to the margarita later, but you're still killing 2 birds with 1 stone. Now get the short, easy drinks out first, and remember ice always comes last. So vodka soda, you order a vodka soda, a beer, or a glass of wine, you're first in line typically. It's okay to scan these because that one impact on that one guest is, getting their drink in 3 minutes is going to be a very positive sign. So the first step in building rounds is the receiving order. And this is where you take a second to internalize the ticket, visualize how you're going to light it up, and visualize it. It's slow. When it's slow, it's a great time to practice this. So think about how many times you actually need to pick up a bottle. So visualize the entire round in your head. Does the lime juice go in more than 1 drink? Is there the same bourbon in 2 drinks? So once you know your tickets, and then eventually tickets, you set it aside for reference in case you need it. But the mastery of this is when you remember all the orders, and it's easier said than done, obviously. But it's better to get the round right than to have to make it over. So if you need to reference the ticket, reference the ticket. So if you're working with frozen or chilled glassware, this adds another layer to the mental game. Now, I didn't like to pull my glasses out of the freezer to warm up to room temperature because I thought that that was part of the temperature of the drink, and so I waited to the absolute last second to pull out the glassware. Now, the order that I would deliver cocktails would be neat pours, shots. If there are shots, I would get rid of those immediately. Anything that's muddled comes next. And what I used to do is set up a placeholder shaker and then put the fruit in there, so and without muddling. And then would come the blended drinks, and then came the stirred down drinks, stirred up drinks, shaken down drinks, drinks on the rocks, shaken with an effervescent, shaken up drinks. Then I would muddle the cocktails. Then I would swizzle. Then I would build the cocktails, the one-on-one, the highballs. Then I would make the glass of wine, the beer, and then I would top everything with the effervescence, whether it's soda or champagne. And then I would do, if we had draft beer, I'd do a draft beer after that, because that has the most deterioration. So that's a lot, but let's talk about quality control for a second. Now, everybody makes mistakes. This is, when you think about it, we're making millions of calculations in our head. So when we're internalizing this method, it's going to happen a lot that we make mistakes. My advice is to mentally walk through the rounds with a coworker before using live bottles. You can say, what if? Think of this as like kind of push-ups for your brain. But if you say, hey, I got this, I got a margarita, Manhattan, Tom Collins, and a gin and tonic. What's your order? So it's hard enough for cocktail bars to make money without having to comp drinks that weren't made properly or took forever. So do this verbally, and then run your mind through it, and then it gets easier and easier and easier. So practice this visualization, and it will get much, much, much easier. And then what your mind knows, your body will follow. And so drill yourself, drill your team, work with each other, and this is a great way to learn menus as well. You can incrementally grow with this as well. So you start with one drink, then you start with 2 drinks, then you start with 3 drinks, and then 4 drinks, and then up to 8, 10 drinks, whatever your mind can handle. Again, this is a great way to learn a new menu or to learn classic specs. So, once you're kind of at this point where you're able to create 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 drinks just mentally in your mind, then you're just a complete ninja and a badass, and you can work in any bar that I've ever worked in. So, I miss Rematch, by the way. Rematch was fun. So, we talked about mise en place. Now, can we see the parallels between mise en place and your life? So mise en place and workflow they go very much hand in hand. Now, if you think about it, at Death & Co, we would routinely show up at least an hour or 2 before work to make our own syrups, to cut garnishes, to set up our mise. And the point of this is that without preparation, there's rarely high performance. So how do we set ourselves up like we set up our bars? Now, just here are a couple of ideas and thoughts. But we plan I like to plan my day to minimize decisions and prepare elements of my life before I need it, so I can, so it's on standby for when I do need it. I like to create an optimal environment for performance by eliminating distractions and eliminating the need for decisions. It could be, this could be in the physical world, of course, but what really matters is what happens in your mind. Now, think about how many decisions you make in a day. Just think about it. It's a lot. So it's like, what time am I going to wake up? What time am I going to go to bed? What am I going to wear today? What am I going to do today? What am I going to eat? What appointments am I going to go to? How am I going to, achieve my goals? Whatever it is. Each of these things is a little decision, and it adds up to and compounds to what ultimately becomes what is known as decision fatigue. So when we're setting up our mise, we eliminate having to make decisions because the lime juice is always exactly where the lime juice is. But we literally get tired of making decisions. So having to make too many decisions actually impacts our ability to make good decisions. And so if we take a few simple steps to reduce the number of decisions that we make, we preserve the bandwidth necessary to focus on what really actually matters in our lives. And so, again, think about this when you're talking about how your bar is set up. Like, we eliminate decisions all the time. So we have a certain amount of cares to give in any one day before we sleep and reset. So it's important to judiciously use this amount of bandwidth for what's important. So this is exactly what we do when we're setting up our bars. We design the most efficient and effective way to solve complex problems, e.g., a complex cocktail, and making many of them. So a common myth is that our sapient brains are good at multitasking. But the truth is we're not good at multitasking. We're good at switching, but we're not great at doing multiple things at the same time. We can walk and chew gum at the same time, but just not very well. But reality, so we may call it multitasking, but it's actually just managing distractions. And so if we're able to focus on the most important things, and we can be effective at that one thing at a time. This is not me making this up, this is science. So by mastering one thing at a time with intention, we become machines of simple movements. And, remember, we're talking about slow is smooth, smooth is fast. Here are just a few ways we can apply these principles to our lives. So one thing that I do is it would drive some people crazy, but I do use time blocking. And so every hour of my day is blocked off to certain tasks that I like to do based on when I'm creative or when I think I'm going to be tired, when I need the most energy. And I plan out my daily routine starting from the day before. Now, routine is a big deal for us. Routine and ritual are big deals for humans. So I actually set an alarm for what time I'm supposed to go to bed. Not for when I'm supposed to wake up, but when I'm supposed to go to bed. Some people would prefer both, but I used to have 4 daily alarms to get my mindset on what I needed to focus on to prepare for what I knew was what I wanted to accomplish. So if I wanted to work out the next morning, I would set out my clothes, my workout clothes, ready, so I didn't have to decide what I was going to wear in the morning, because that would create a barrier. And it created additional steps in between me doing what I knew I needed to do and actually doing it. So I would eliminate that by just saying, here are my clothes, here's my water bottle, everything is all set for me to go. Another big thing is tidying up. Being tidy in your life is we don't understand that like having stuff around and like clutter is very stressful. Now, all the stuff I'm talking about may sound like I'm kind of creating stress, but it really is in line with one of the paradoxes of modern civilization. We need order to be free. By creating processes and routines, we create habits that allow us to be the people that we want to be. I'm not talking about the airbrushed faked people that we see on TV. I'm talking about being a polished person and happy person yourself. I'm talking about being available to be a real contributor to our families, our crafts, and our community. And this doesn't happen when we waste a lot of time looking for our keys. Stress kills more people than cancer. So by arranging our workspaces, our businesses, our minds, our drop boxes, our email inboxes, our relationships, our kids, our lives in a way that reduces drag and friction, we actually enrich ourselves by allowing joy and happiness to enter. Now, I'm not trying to say I'm like the Dalai Lama here. This is absolutely a work in progress, but I absolutely believe it. So my question is, what would you be willing to do to be happy? And I would suggest try visualizing the perfect round. This will get you closer to visualizing the perfect day. If you'd like to discuss these ideas further, please be sure to connect with me on the Global Bar Week portal, or you can find me anywhere on the internet at Jason Luttrell. Thank you so much for checking out this presentation, and I hope it was a good use of your time. Thank you.